I'm Jessica Becker, and welcome to Human Powered Podcast. If you've listened to past episodes, you've probably heard me introduce the podcast, but today we're trying something different, and we're starting a new series. It's a series of conversations with myself and Jen Rubin. So I'm sitting here with Jen Rubin. She has been the producer of Love Wisconsin, which is our digital storytelling project, but also worked with me behind the scenes on past Human Powered series. But today we are going to start conversations talking about what's going on with Wisconsin Humanities and the public humanities around the state during a period of time we're calling hibernation, which is a word that we'll dive into and unpack here in a minute. But hey, Jen, great to see you.
Hey, Jessica. Yeah, it's fun to not be behind the scenes with the podcast. And I can tell things are different because you and I have these fancy new microphones, and there's some sort of mesh thing that we're putting in front of the microphone to make our voice sound better. So this should be fun. And I'm glad we're having our first conversation with Dena to really kind of get started with this new phase of the Human Powered Podcast.
Yeah. So we're here with Dena Wortzel too, which is really fun because the three of us have worked together for about 5 years, and now Dena Wortzel is going to be our first guest in this series of conversations. And Dena is the executive director of Wisconsin Humanities, which is a role she has had for a while and is going to continue through hibernation. Welcome, Dena.
Well, thanks. This is super weird and also makes me happy because, as we'll be talking about in a minute, and I'm already prepared to try to laugh more than I cry while doing this. We are sadly not going to be working together, the three of us, in the same way that we have for years. But this podcast makes me super happy because it's a way for us to keep sharing the things that we really care about Wisconsin and the humanities. So yay, yay for that.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of interested in where this will go. And we're glad to all you listeners for tuning into what we believe is an important conversation. What is happening around Wisconsin, and specifically what's happening with Wisconsin Humanities? So Dena, do you want to, we want to hear what's happening and how it started. So do you want to tell us about the morning of April 3rd? You woke up and what?
Well, our organization in my 30-year career got hit by an asteroid. That asteroid came, as you say, early in the morning, April 3rd. So I'm an early riser. I live on a farm, as you guys know. And my morning routine is I have to have a cup of tea when I get up. So I got my cup of tea, and usually I take a look at the news. Sometimes I check my email first. That was the morning I checked my email first, and I never got to the news because the news was in my inbox, which was flooded with messages from my fellow directors of other state humanities councils, all of which had the same question: did you get the termination email? And like quite a few folks, I was like, what? I couldn't find whatever this email was. I was already terrified. And then I found it where some other people had in my junk mail. There was an email that came from some super weird email address that did not look like any genuine federal government communication, but it said it was signed by the acting chair of the NEH. And what it said was that the grant that pays for about 90% of everything that we do at Wisconsin Humanities, for Wisconsin, all of our grants, our programs, our staff, and everything was terminated completely, absolutely, as of the day before. Even though DOGE had already, been causing havoc with other federal agencies, and, there were already court challenges at that point, I really didn't expect that we and the other 55 state and territorial humanities councils would be a target, because no matter what party has been in the majority, state councils have always been supported by Congress. We're really nonpartisan. We offer all kinds of programs. I mean, Human Powered, Love Wisconsin, our grants, people, love what we do, and they love what our other councils do all over the country. And we've always had this support. So I was just stunned. Our federal funding is in federal statute. It has this solid legal foundation. I was just completely stunned and horrified.
What I remember from this is actually we had a staff meeting planned for Thursday, and we all got into the office, all of the 8 staff, for a 9 a.m. start, and we were all a little on edge because we knew that DOGE had been at the NEH offices earlier in the week, and I think same as you, Dina, I was prepared for what I thought would be a lot of censorship. But I knew that the budget had just been passed and that President Trump had signed the budget and that the National Endowment for the Humanities was in the budget in the same way that, as you say, it has been for the last 53 years. And so we were on edge, but we showed up for this staff meeting and one by one we walked into the room and you kind of looked like you were had been crying and you said to me they took the nuclear option. It felt like an attack.
Well, and I think, I mean, my memory is that there was, like Jessica was saying, like there's starting to be some worries that something was going to happen. So we actually were coming in specifically to come up with like an advocacy plan, and I think us, probably a lot of the country, I don't think we had all sort of come to terms with the fact that DOGE was just going to not pay attention to Congress, that like, that none of that was going to be relevant. Like DOGE was going to do things that was not legal and it was just going to get done, right? And so I think we were all sort of learning in real time pretty quickly um, that didn't matter.
So that was April 3rd. The last almost 2 months now have been really intense, really intense. And we're humanists, right? So we have this perspective. We know we're not alone in this situation. This is actually happening all over the country, and yet, it's happening to us for the last 7+ weeks. So you get this message on April 3rd, and we're sitting in this meeting trying to think about what in the world does that actually mean? How do you shut down an organization effective immediately? Obviously, we are 8 staff members with lives and salaries that are going to be suddenly ending, but also all these programs that we do around the state. Do you know what was the first thing that you started thinking about? How did you go into that first day?
Well, I took a deep breath and I did try to figure out like what really are our options. It wasn't really clear. I mean, now, as you put it, now we're talking about, are we shutting down? Are we not? At the time, even that wasn't completely clear. What I knew was that we were in absolutely dire shape. And I knew that we had to look at letting staff go, all of us. And I knew that more painfully, it meant looking at stopping every single program that we had going. We actually had already canceled one grant round because of anxiety that we were having. I don't know if some people who were looking at our grants will remember that, but we were already feeling a little anxious. But now this wasn't just canceling a single grant round. We had to cancel the entire grant program. And very soon after, I realized we had to actually cancel grants to people who had them, who hadn't finished their projects. But it really was a cascading disaster. It wasn't like I just suddenly looked at everything and knew immediately what had to happen or what would go wrong. So yeah, so what became very clear within a couple of days though was that all of the staff to differing degrees would be laid off within 2 months.
It's been like whiplash,
Yeah.
really. It has been personally really difficult to sort of figure out what each day, you're like, okay, so what am I going to do today again? I had these like to-do lists from before April 3rd that then it was like, okay, I guess I'm just balling that up and throwing it away. My job just changed overnight to be this crisis situation. Back to the metaphor of a bomb having dropped. It's like, okay, now it's about food and water. Like, what are we doing? How are we getting everything boxed up? Are we calling the archives and trying to record this history of 53 years?
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. Like, there's just sort of these, like, to you were doing what, like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing. So like, so if you think of like crisis communication like had to happen. But then like, I keep thinking of this example, Jessica, where, um, you know, we had to merge the Love Wisconsin email MailChimp program with the Wisconsin Humanities, and it's a real practical thing that has to happen to stop those payments. But you're like, I can't work on that today because I'm crisis communicating, which is, so
Right.
it's like, so you can't get to the like, actually, we have to shut down this operation.
Right, because there was still so many people in the press to talk to, and so many, we had to. Dena's done an amazing amount of meetings with board members because we
Right.
have a volunteer board of uh, incredible people who also needed to be informed. They're not in the office with us every day and managing what's their role going to be going forward. The executive committee had to step up and help figure a bunch of stuff out. And then we have literally, bills to pay off.
So, Dina, I just want to go back to one of the things you were saying earlier, which is just sort of like the impact of having to stop some of the grant funding that was given out. And I think, Wisconsin Humanities is such a unique opportunity for funding in the state of Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin gets so much less arts funding and humanities funding from the state. So the federal level is just so important. And you've worked at Wisconsin Humanities for so many years. And so just what when you think about, oh, it would just have devastated you for these programs to not have been funded over the years, what are some of the ones that come to mind for you?
Well, one that comes to mind is one that we shared in the first season of Human Powered, the stories from the Flood Project, which I don't know if folks listening remember, but in 2018, if you were in Wisconsin then, what's called the driftless, the southwest part of Wisconsin was hit by the most devastating floods. And people died, houses were swept away. It was utterly devastating. And we gave a grant to this wonderful group called the Driftless Writing Center based in Viroqua that helped them do something that they saw as an urgent need. They saw that people who survived this experience really needed to tell their stories. And so they got volunteers from all over the place, including, college students to go out and record it. I think it was about 100 interviews with flood survivors. And they took those interviews and turned them into a booklet. But maybe even more important, they held events where they got people together to share their stories with one another, to be together. And it really helped survivors of that flood heal from that trauma. But also, the other thing that it did that's so important is that legislators and policymakers came to those events. And that's crucial to me because the thing that was said when the National Endowment for the Humanities was founded was that the National Endowment for the Humanities was founded, and so were we then at the state level, because, quote, democracy demands wisdom and vision. In other words, the work that we do, it connects people to one another, the way the stories from the flood brought those flood survivors together, but it also gives people ideas and information to be good participating citizens. And so I'll always remember that project because it did both of those things so brilliantly, and really responding to an urgent need, and then directly affecting the ways that the people who deal with flood management in the Kickapoo and the surrounding area deal with it. So that to me is just a stellar example.
One of the things that I like to remember about the grant program is that it's often seed money. So, there is more money out there and when people see that Wisconsin Humanities have funded a project, it's kind of a stamp of approval that then brings in and multiplies. And that's how things get done.
So, Dana, hibernation, it's like, we conjure up different images with that word. So, can you sort of tell us what that means, practically for Wisconsin Humanities?
Well, it does mean a little bit, what you tend to think of. we're really lucky that the next chapter fundraising campaign that we launched very soon after the full reality hit has really, people have really responded to it, and it's making a huge difference in what we can do. But we are going into a cave in that sense. The organization as a nonprofit is going to continue to exist, and I'll explain in a minute why that's so important. But most of the staff will be laid off as of the 3rd of June. There are a couple of us who are going to continue on at 75% time. We have enough money to do that until January, which is the point at which we're hoping that in the coming federal fiscal year, that federal funding will return, that Congress will decide that maybe actually we want to try to do something and bring those funds back. So it's really important that the organization as a nonprofit continue to exist, because there's federal statute that says that money by formula has to come to Wisconsin, and it can only come to Wisconsin Humanities. Otherwise, that money doesn't come to Wisconsin at all. So we need to be here for that to happen. But right now, what hibernation means is that thanks to our donors, we do have enough money so that Love Wisconsin stories can still be read by people on the website. It means that those stories are there for people to read, that Human Powered is still there as a podcast for people to be able to download and listen to. If you want to hear about that Stories from the Flood story, it'll still be there in hibernation. I'm thrilled that we are going to be able to, do these podcast episodes, so that most importantly for me in this time, we continue to connect all of the people who've received grants, who've shared their incredible projects in their communities and with each other, to connect those people and to continue to make the case to Congress for why the humanities do in fact make democracy happen. They make communities able to tackle the challenges that we're facing. We know that Wisconsin Humanities is certainly not the only organization that has been devastated by what's happening, right? We all know that there are cuts everywhere that are affecting science and healthcare and farmers across Wisconsin. We've had farms that are going bankrupt because of all of what's happening in DC. But what to me is so special about our work and why we need to keep standing up for it is that we'll never tackle any of the problems that we have, today or tomorrow if we don't understand each other and talk to one another in communities. And so that's the message that, in my lonesomeness without you guys, except on the podcast, I'm going to try to keep getting out there in this period of hibernation and hoping to come back.
A couple of things that are happening during the hibernation, Dena, you mentioned the podcast, but you're also going to keep talking with people, right? You're going to stay connected through the newsletter. So that is a way that people could keep getting the news from you, and if they're not already subscribed to the newsletter.
Yeah, so our e-newsletter is going to be a really important way for us to stay connected. And my vision for that is that the newsletter become a place both for me to share what we're hoping to do in hibernation as it evolves, but also a place for me to share back to the larger community of people doing public humanities work what each other is doing. So I'm really hopeful that in this incredibly weird time that I can play a role in bringing people's voices forward in the way that we always have, continuing to tell those stories that really are everything that we do at Wisconsin Humanities, and continue to do that work in this time.
Yeah, and it's nice to hear the energy in your voice, Dena, because this is a really weird time for so many of us. I think, it's a moment in history. I keep thinking, looking down from space, this is a blip in our history that will leave a lasting mark. And so there's a lot of twists and turns, a lot still uncertain, but we are excited to hear that you can imagine a future, and that civic conversations are never going to not be important. So I'm excited to stay here through this podcast channel to keep talking to people. And I think that one of the things that I'm most excited about is hearing what other people are doing, other people who are working in their communities, doing public humanities work. I love hearing about these projects. So it's exciting to get to go forward and bring people into the conversation and share that conversation out, and to get to do it with Jen. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. And I think also like, we're going to try and do this podcast twice a month. So it's a place where we can let people know what's coming up if there's listening sessions, or things like that. One thing, I know from doing Love Wisconsin is that there's people in every corner of the state doing like such impactful work. Many of it is humanities-based work, although it's not like called humanities work, but they're just doing stuff in their communities that adds to the civic health, and they're interesting people. So it's going to be fun to talk to them with Jessica.
And maybe the first thing we'll do is unpack that word humanities, because as you say, people are doing the humanities, even if they don't call it that. That's the fun stuff. That's the meat of life to me, because it's really like you're out there exploring and with curiosity and connecting with people. That's what the humanities is all about.
Yeah, so Dina, well, thanks for first of all, A, like really laying out what exactly happened with Wisconsin Humanities, but also B, letting Jessica and I experiment with, how did the sound work with the microphones and all that.
Well, thank you for doing this with me and having patience with me. Invite me back sometime when I'm not feeling so emotional. This week is too hard.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. We'll keep it going. Well, that was a really interesting conversation. I think especially because you and I lived it, it's nice to kind of unpack it here and imagine, what would someone want to know about this period of our lives that's been very dramatic, and also, what comes next.
Yeah, and I think, I know when I've talked to friends about, what happened with losing my job at Wisconsin Humanities and what happened, I think for people who aren't in the line of fire of DOGE, and of course, so many people are in so many ways, but people who aren't in the line of fire, they're just a little shocked, like, wait, what happened? The money was appropriated by Congress, and what happened? So yeah, so I think that was interesting that Dina kind of took us step by step there. And I really appreciate that she gave some examples about why humanities work really matters for our community. So I enjoyed the conversation.
I did too. And I'm looking forward to going into more conversations where we really get into the heart of what the humanities is, and so we can hear what is continuing to happen and how this is impacting people, and how communities come together during this weird time, because I do believe that ultimately the humanities is an accessible thing that all humans do. So what's the role of federal funding in this, and what are people continuing to do to process this interesting period of history, and how are we continuing to get to know each other and understand what needs to happen for our future. So I'm pretty excited about these conversations, Jen. I'm excited to explore this front side of producing a podcast together.
Yeah, and I think if you're listening and you haven't already subscribed to Human Powered, subscribe to it. We're on all the podcast platforms. And, we're just to kind of follow what you're saying, Jessica, like we're just in this moment in time, right? Where like our government is like literally taking history down off of websites, right? Like where, all these things that kind of connect us as humans is being removed. And so we're going to do our little part to sort of make this more front and center about what's happening in Wisconsin and why this all matters. So yeah, stay tuned. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we'll be back. Thanks for being here, everybody.